Playful, pacifist, hero. That's the Aang we all remember. The Aang we were taught to love. He's the smiling 12-year-old monk on a flying bison, the last of his kind, destined to save the world. His story feels like a classic hero's journey, a victory for nonviolence and hope against pure evil. We celebrate him for his gentle spirit, for choosing mercy when everyone else was screaming for revenge, and for bringing balance back to a world shattered by war. In our minds, he's the perfect hero for a story that, despite all its darkness, never loses its optimism. But what if that's a comforting lie? What if the cheerful hero of our childhood hides a much darker reality, one of selfish fear and consistent moral failure? This isn't just the story of how Aang saved the world. This is the story of how his flaws almost doomed it. The idea of Aang as this perfect hero is a myth we've told ourselves, a neat little summary that ignores a seriously disturbing pattern of behavior. When you look closely, his journey isn't defined by heroic certainty. It's defined by a paralyzing fear of responsibility, a habit of putting his own feelings before the mission, and a deep-seated selfishness that put millions of lives at risk and hurt the people closest to him. This is a closer look at that pattern, at the dark truth we've all ignored for way too long. To get to the heart of Aang's darkness, we have to go right back to the beginning, back to the moment that kick-started the tragedy of the 100-Year War. We're told the story of a young boy crushed by a destiny he never asked for. The monks at the Southern Air Temple, seeing the storm of war on the horizon, tell Aang he's the Avatar years too early. They tell him he has to leave his home, his friends, and his mentor, Monk Gyatso, to start his training. The usual take on this is that it was just too much pressure for a kid. And sure it was, but it's important to see Aang's reaction not just as fear, but as a deliberate choice to abandon his duty. He wasn't just scared, he was selfish. He overhears the monks planning to send him away, but he doesn't confront them, doesn't ask for advice, doesn't even try to grasp how serious things are. He just runs. In the middle of the night, he scribbles a note, gets on his bison, and flees the single most important job in the world. Let's be honest about what that really meant. This wasn't just a kid running away from home. This was the world's only protector, the only person who could bend all four elements, turning his back on that duty at the worst possible moment. His fear of being separated from Gyatso, a personal attachment, mattered more to him than the fate of the planet. And that decision, born of selfish fear, had immediate, catastrophic consequences. Caught in a storm, his panicked Avatar state didn't save him. It trapped him in an iceberg for 100 years, a frozen monument to his failure. And while he was gone, the world burned. Fire Lord Sozin already had his plans for war, and knowing the next Avatar was an air nomad, he timed a genocidal attack with the Great Comet. Aang didn't just fail to be there to stop the war. His absence left his people and the entire world completely defenseless. While the Fire Nation would have attacked anyway, Aang was the one person who might have been able to stop them. Every empty temple, every skeleton in a monk's robe, is a brutal reminder of the consequence of his choice. The 100-Year War, a century of death and destruction, unfolded because the one person who could have made a difference chose his own feelings over the fate of the world. This is Aang's original sin. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a massive moral failure, rooted in his refusal to face hardship. He didn't want the responsibility of being the Avatar, so he abandoned it. And while it's easy to feel for a kid under pressure, the show often lets him off the hook for the sheer scale of the devastation that his choice left the world to face. He wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He was the architect of his own century-long absence. And this act of running away wasn't a one-time thing. It was the first and most devastating example of a lifelong pattern of avoidance that would define his character. It set the precedent for what was to come. When faced with a choice between his own comfort and the greater good, Aang's first instinct is always to protect himself. This guilt, the knowledge that a century of war and the death of his people happened on his watch, follows him for the rest of his life. But instead of turning into responsible action, it often just leads to more recklessness and emotional failure. He spends the rest of the story trying to make up for a sin he can never erase, a sin born from a darkness he never really overcomes. Aang's return to the world doesn't signal some sudden change into a mature hero. Instead, that pattern of selfish decision-making just keeps repeating itself all through his journey to master the elements. He consistently shows that he can't separate what he wants from what the world needs, leading to a string of failures that hurt his friends and threatened the whole mission. The most glaring example? His catastrophic failure at Ba Sing Se. Under Guru Pathak, Aang is right on the verge of mastering the Avatar state, the one power he absolutely needs to beat the Fire Lord. The Guru tells him that to open the final chakra, he has to let go of his earthly attachments, specifically his crush on Katara. It's a deep spiritual lesson. To truly serve the world, the Avatar can't be chained by personal desires. Aang refuses. He sees a vision of Katara in danger and abandons his training at the last possible second. He chooses his feelings for one person over the power needed to save everyone. Iroh later tries to spin this as a wise choice, but the consequences speak for themselves. Aang rushes back to Ba Sing Se, totally unprepared and emotionally compromised. This one decision contributes directly to the fall of the entire Earth Kingdom. Faced with Azula and Zuko, Aang is forced to make the exact choice he ran from. But it's too late. His hesitation, his refusal to master his own spirit, leaves him wide open. When he finally tries to enter the Avatar state, Azula shoots him down with a bolt of lightning. He's struck down, and for a terrifying moment, the Avatar cycle itself is almost broken forever. It's only Katara's quick thinking with the spirit water that saves him, but the damage is done. Ba Sing Se, the last major stronghold against the Fire Nation, falls. The fall of the city wasn't just Aang's fault, it was also the result of Azula's genius infiltration and the Dai Li's betrayal. But Aang's failure was a critical blow. This isn't a minor setback, it's the biggest victory for the Fire Nation in the whole war, and it was practically handed to them by Aang's inability to put his duty first. This refusal to do the hard emotional work isn't just limited to his spiritual training. It shows up in his bending practice too. When he starts learning earthbending from Toph, he's terrible at it. Earthbending is all about being unyielding and strong, the total opposite of his airy, evasive nature. He can't move a rock. And when he gets frustrated, he doesn't work harder. He lashes out at his teacher. He yells at Toph and runs away from the lesson like a child. It's a tantrum, but it's a telling one. Aang hates anything that doesn't come easily, anything that forces him to face his own weaknesses. This pattern even poisons his friendships. In Bato of the Water Tribe, Aang finds a map that could lead Katara and Sokka to their long-lost father. He knows how much they miss him, but his own fear of being abandoned is so strong that he hides the map. Think about that. It's a deliberate lie to his best friends, the people who have become his new family, all to soothe his own insecurity. When they find out, they are justifiably furious. It's a moment that exposes a selfish, almost manipulative side of Aang. He's willing to deceive his friends to get what he needs. His emotional immaturity also explodes into terrifying, uncontrolled rage. In the desert, after Appa is stolen, Aang's grief turns him into a monster. He enters the Avatar state not as a controlled weapon for justice, but as a blind force of pure fury. He nearly kills the Sandbenders he blames for the theft, and puts his own friends in danger before Katara can calm him down. This isn't righteous anger. It's a terrifying loss of control that goes against every pacifist ideal he claims to have. It shows that under the goofy smile, there's a power that's just as destructive as the Fire Nations if it isn't guided by wisdom. Even his romance with Katara is stained by this self-centeredness. During the Ember Island Players episode, when Katara is clearly confused and trying to sort out her feelings, Aang pushes a kiss on her. He acts on his own impulse, ignoring her obvious discomfort. His love for her, the same love he used to justify his failure at Ba Sing Se, feels less like a mature partnership and more like a childish crush that demands to be satisfied. From Ba Sing Se to the desert, the evidence is clear. Aang isn't a hero who stumbles. He's a deeply flawed kid whose selfishness and fear repeatedly make things worse. Nowhere is Aang's core selfishness more obvious or more dangerous than in the final battle with Fire Lord Ozai. Sozin's comet is here, firebenders are at peak power, and the world is about to be burned to ashes. The mission is simple. The Avatar has to stop the Fire Lord and end the war. But at the final moment, Aang freezes. He's spent his whole life believing that all life is sacred, a noble air nomad philosophy that becomes a huge problem when you're facing a genocidal tyrant. Aang just can't bring himself to kill Ozai. He turns to his past lives, to the wisdom of thousands of years of avatars, and one by one, they all tell him the same thing. Avatar Roku, haunted by his own hesitation, warns him to be decisive. Avatar Kyoshi flat out says that only justice will bring peace. Even Avatar Yangchen, another air nomad, gives him the most critical advice of all. His duty to the world requires him to sacrifice his own spiritual needs to do what's necessary. The message couldn't be clearer. The Avatar's job is bigger than their personal hang-ups. But Aang refuses to listen. He dismisses the wisdom of every single Avatar before him, stubbornly clinging to a personal belief that just doesn't fit the situation. This isn't moral superiority. It's the ultimate act of selfishness. Aang is putting his own spiritual purity, his desire to keep his hands clean above the existence of the entire world. He's so scared of compromising his own ideals that he's willing to risk letting a monster win. His struggle is framed as a beautiful, pacifist crisis, but it's really a massive dereliction of duty. He's basically telling the millions of people about to be wiped out that his conscience is more important than their lives. And then, the show pulls its biggest punch to protect Aang from his own flaws. In a complete deus ex machina, a lion turtle, a creature that was barely even hinted at before, conveniently shows up and gives Aang the magical ability of energy bending. This allows him to strip Ozai of his power without killing him. Aang is handed a perfect, consequence-free way out. He gets to defeat the villain and keep his personal code intact. But what if that lion turtle hadn't shown up? The world would have been doomed. Without that magic trick, Aang had two choices: kill Ozai or lose. His refusal to act would have meant victory for a man planning to burn a continent to the ground. The story rewards Aang for his stubbornness, making it seem like he found a better way. But the truth is, it was a get-out-of-jail-free card. It let him avoid the hard choice that other, more responsible avatars had to make. Even his victory in the fight relied on pure luck. Ozai dominates him for most of the battle. It's only when Aang is accidentally slammed into a rock, jarring the very chakra he refused to open earlier, that he can finally access the full power of the Avatar state and turn the tide. His ultimate triumph depends on a lucky accident. He's not a moral genius who found a better way. He's a man who, when faced with the ultimate test, chose himself over the world and was saved by sheer, dumb luck. You might hope that, with the war over, Aang would finally grow up, that he'd overcome his selfish tendencies and become the wise, compassionate leader everyone thought he was. But the sequel series, The Legend of Korra, shows us that's not what happened. It reveals that the pattern of favoritism and selfishness wasn't just a phase, it was a core part of his character that he carried right into fatherhood. Aang and Katara had 3 kids: Bumi, a non-bender; Kia, a waterbender; and Tenzin, the only airbender. The responsibility of rebuilding air nomad culture fell entirely on Aang's shoulders. And when Tenzin was born, Aang's focus shifted almost completely to him. And according to his other children, this wasn't just fatherly attention, it was blatant, painful favoritism. In Korra, a middle-aged Kia and Bumi finally confront Tenzin about it, and their resentment is still raw after decades. They talk about how Aang would take Tenzin on special trips to the air temples, leaving them behind. These weren't just training sessions, they were chances for bonding that they were shut out of. In his desperate need to preserve his lost culture, Aang made his other kids feel like they didn't really belong in his world. Bumi even admits he joined the United Forces just to try and get his dad's approval. This isn't just sibling rivalry. As Kia and Bumi tell it, it's a direct continuation of the pattern we saw when Aang was a kid. Just like he prioritized Gyatso over his duty and Katara over Ba Sing Se, adult Aang prioritized his cultural legacy over the emotional needs of 2 of his own children. He saw Tenzin not just as a son, but as the key to his own project. In the process, he inflicted deep wounds on Kia and Bumi, making them feel like second best. Now, some people argue that Aang had to focus on Tenzin, but that misses the point. The problem wasn't the training, it was the emotional neglect. He failed to see that you can't rebuild a culture of compassion by sacrificing the well-being of your own family. Why couldn't he take all his kids to the air temples to learn about their heritage? Why couldn't he value Bumi's leadership or Kia's connection to their water tribe roots? His failure to do so suggests his motivation was, once again, all about him. He was so consumed by his own loss that he was blind to the new losses he was creating in his own home. Yes, Aang grew up without parents, but that's an explanation, not an excuse. Zuko had a monster for a father, and he tried to be better. Aang, the supposed master of spiritual wisdom, never seemed to look inward and see the damage his favoritism was causing. His legacy as a father is the final, tragic proof of his dark truth. His selfishness didn't disappear. It just changed its target. He saved the world, but he failed his own family, leaving two of his children feeling like they were never good enough. So, where does that leave us? We have a deeply uncomfortable picture of Avatar Aang, one that's a far cry from the heroic myth. The fun-loving kid we remember was also a boy whose fear led him to abandon the world, leaving it defenseless against a century of war. The romantic hero was a teenager whose selfish attachments directly contributed to the fall of the Earth Kingdom. The celebrated pacifist was so rigid in his thinking that he valued his own clean conscience over the lives of millions, saved from his own stubbornness only by a stroke of narrative luck. And the legendary hero who saved the world became a father who created a deep rift in his own family. This isn't to say Aang was a villain or that he didn't do any good. He did defeat the Fire Lord and bring about peace. But the dark truth isn't that Aang was secretly evil. It's that he was never the simple, pure hero we remember. He's a much more complex and tragic figure, a traumatized kid who was never really forced to confront his deepest flaws. His journey isn't a clean story of a boy becoming a hero. It's the messy, stumbling, and often failing struggle of a person whose fears and selfish desires repeatedly made things worse and hurt the people who loved him most. Time and again, the story of Avatar. The last Airbender shields Aang from the worst consequences of his actions. He runs away but gets to be the hero anyway. He refuses to let go of his attachments but gets to master the Avatar state by accident. He refuses to kill Ozai but gets a magic power-up that solves the problem for him. The story literally bends over backwards to make sure Aang never has to truly overcome his flaws. And in watching, we were taught to overlook them too. We celebrate his innocence and his gentle nature, but we ignore the dark side of that innocence. We ignore the selfishness that poses as principle, the avoidance that's framed as sensitivity, and the immaturity that's excused as charm. The dark truth isn't that Aang was evil. It's that his celebrated innocence was also his greatest flaw, and we've ignored the cost of that flaw for far too long.